I was talking to a friend of mine this week, and he was talking about, I guess, his priorities and how his priorities, he had an epiphany about his priorities and shifting his priorities around and trying to figure out a way to schedule his time so that there wasn't as much interference and so that he could maximize his time and get a lot done. And that's good. It was good. But it got me thinking about my priorities. And it's always good to consider your priorities, because your priorities are what you prioritize. It's you trying to decide ahead of time what you're going to give your best hours of your day and your energy towards in order to get the most out of things. It's so much about productivity and so much about doing things. And what is that? What is that? And and it's not just with me, it's really with our world. There's this sort of pseudo-religion, this sort of mindset in Western culture where we're basically all working towards a better tomorrow. That we've put it on ourselves as an entire people to create a better world, a utopian society. Imagine putting evolution on top of human history and just saying that we're evolving into this perfect world, and we're working towards quality of life for everyone. And we've made lots and lots of strides towards that, technologically and scientifically and economically, and all these ways you can look at how we're better than we used to be, and how our lifespan is a lot longer than it once was, and our quality of life is much better. We're not using outhouses anymore, that kind of thing. But we're engaged in this, and so we all think about what our part is to play, and how we need to be productive, and we need to get stuff done, and we're all kind of pushing towards progress. Well, the experts say that there's at least two ways where we're not progressing. We're actually regressing, okay? And those two areas are emotional, just our emotional lives, and our relational lives. Emotionally and relationally, we're actually doing worse than we ever have. And we're trading in. I think we're trading in a lot of these things. We're trading in our relationships and our emotional well-being for technological advancement, for productivity, for scientific, development. And is this good? And the truth is, it's not good. And so I've just been thinking a lot about that, and what steps that we could take to sort of undo some of that stuff. And is it really so necessary? And I guess what I'm believing or starting to see is that most of all of my feelings of productivity and prioritization and all that stuff, if I'm really honest, what's driving those desires for me, and maybe it's not true for everybody, but I can't help but think that maybe it is. But assess your own life. But what's driving a lot of my to-do lists, and what's driving a lot of my need for productivity, is fear. Okay. It's not just ambition. It's not just, desire for stability or security, but even those things. It's fear. Why am I up for prioritizing things? Because I'm afraid that I'm not prioritizing the right things. Why do I need to fill my life up this week with all this stuff? Because I'm afraid if I don't fill my life up with all this stuff, that it's going to get filled up with stuff that I don't want. Or I'm afraid that if I'm not proactive about it, that I'll have to just take whatever comes my way, or whatever. There's a lot of ways to think about it. But how much is fear really controlling our world and controlling our individual lives? I mean, just think for a second. Our economy, economics, that stuff's based on fear. Okay, the stock market. Ask an expert. It's based on faith and fear. That's really what it's based on. Consumerism is all built on fear and not having something that you think that you need. Politics are all based on fear. Hey, if you don't go out and vote, if you don't do this, and this is what's going to happen. Or hey, if you don't get this guy out, then this is all the stuff that's going to happen. And we just get all this stuff, and it's all shrouded in fear. Okay, and so fear is what's running much of the show. And it should help us that the Bible says 365 times is what I understand. I haven't counted them all, but I've understood that the command, do not fear, is written in the Bible 365 times. So it's the most repeated command in the whole Bible. Don't fear, don't fear, don't fear. In fact, in the New Testament, it said that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So to me, that means that there could be the opposite, that there's not fear, but there's power, love, and a sound mind. And that we should be allowing our lives to run on power, the power of God, okay, and the power of love, and a sober or a sound mind. But we're not. We're running it on fear. And so what can be done to combat that? What can be done to help that? And how can we be the kind of people that are not run by fear? Because ultimately, fear is okay, it's good, it's put into our lives on purpose, but ultimately, it just doesn't ever end. It's just a treadmill that you can't get off of. You can always make more money. You can always do some more stuff. You can always expand your business some way. You can always create a better tomorrow. Like, you can always do all this stuff, but when is enough? And how long does it take? And when do you know that you're there? And what's interesting is that COVID, if you think about COVID, it's really shown us how weak as a culture we are. A society that is just based on productivity and just bent on making the world better in a utopian society. It needs technological advancement and economic advancement and scientific advancement. It needs all these productivity machines working, okay? And when suddenly like COVID comes in and we can't do those things, we fall apart. Not only that, but COVID comes in and shows us how fragile we are, how much we aren't really improving all those things, that it's a mirage, that we think we're improving them, but we're really not, that we're actually still really frail human beings that have basic needs. And so yeah, all that just to say, I've been thinking a lot about productivity and our world and but then what's really necessary. And I'll give you another observation. They say that the new normal is just to be able to embrace chaos. Now it's just some experts, or some analysts that I've listened to. They're like, everything is just going to be chaotic. And the new norm is that we never know what's going to happen. That everything can be happening this way and then everything changes. And that we need to somehow become anti-fragile. We need to be the opposite of fragile. We need to create systems where we can go through things, where we can deal with things. But our society is so flimsy right now. There's this guy named Edwin Friedman, and he talks about this myth of progress in the West, and he talks about these 5 aspects of what he calls an anxious culture. And he says that our world is very fragile and anxious, okay? And it depends on hedonism and science and technology and overall well-being in order to function well. And because that's falling apart, there's anxiety everywhere. And he's saying what has created this anxious culture? There's this cycle, okay? And so he says it starts that we become a culture of reactivity, not proactivity, but reactivity. We react to everything. So think about this. The 24/7 news cycle is built on our reactions. When we react strongly, they get more hits. And when they get more hits, they can sell more advertising. So it sounds like social justice for us. It sounds like social awareness for us to be concerned about the news, but really it's just money generation, okay? They're just making money on our desire, okay, to our reaction to things. And the crazier the news, the more we react. And so that's a good example. And so what's happened is there's a culture of reactivity that's been formed. And this leads to a herd mentality. Okay, we're like sheep and we like to feel safe in numbers. And so we stay with the numbers, how everybody else is feeling. And we're always taking the temperature and checking the wind to see how everybody else around us is thinking. And that's most of the time what we want to do and how we want to think. And we want to follow the crowd. And at least emotionally, that's what we do because we feel like there's safety there. But this culture of reactivity and this herd mentality creates in us this cycle of blame, or what he calls blame displacement. And what happens is we start to see all these problems everywhere, start to blame everybody for them. And we blame others instead of being proactive. And we retreat into this perpetual victim status. And some of, I felt like I got into a victim status a while back, and somebody had to shake me up out of it. But if you become a victim and you decide that you're a victim, then it just gives you an excuse to be angry at everybody and everything. And it gives the excuse to not do anything about any of it. And so we enter in this cycle of blame displacement, okay? And then we start to look for fixes. And so we take quick fixes because we kind of want to figure out a way just to get it over with. We start looking for a silver bullet or a magic pill. We have a low tolerance we don't have any perseverance, no endurance. And we just start looking for quick and easy solutions. And then we pick leaders, according to Friedman, we pick leaders that offer to help us, okay? But we get bad leaders because all the leaders that we pick are preying on our cycle of anxiety. So instead of fixing our anxiety or helping with our anxiety, they're just feeding off of it and gaining power from it. And so they'll let those cycles of anxiety stay there and stay in power from those cycles of anxiety. And so what do we do about that? And Friedman says very simply that we need leaders that are that foster a non-anxious presence. And we need people that have a non-anxious presence. And a non-anxious presence, isn't that interesting? And it hit such a bell with me because if I have thought back about in my life, the leaders and the people that have mattered the most to me and that have really been the kind of leaders to look up to and the kind of leaders to draw from and draw strength from, the best leaders in my life, they were a non-anxious presence. In other words, they kept their heads. They didn't just freak out. In fact, it didn't matter what the news was. You give them the bad news and they just can sit with that news, not react, not get all emotional, not get all crazy. They would just let that stuff sit and they would not react too crazy. And it was a non-anxious presence. And just the way that they handled that stress and that all that stuff, just for them to not be anxious about it, but to keep their nose and to keep their cool, did so much in terms of extinguishing the chaos. It was like I could draw from that non-anxious presence and say, you know what, I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be overreacting like this. I don't have to be frantic about what's going to happen next. I don't have to be so anxious about the future. And I don't have to be thinking about all the ways that I'm going to try to head it off before it does something else. Even just their presence, and it was powerful and it was helpful. And so what I think that Jesus was, and what we need to be trying to foster in our character, in our lives, is a non-anxious presence, okay? We need to be able to step in and to be the kind of people that don't lose their heads, that don't get all curled up about what's going on, that can take it in stride, that can keep the peace. I love just this idea that, and I've been thinking about it since last week, but the two stories of the two storms in the book of Matthew, they're so similar, but they're so different. And if you recall, the first one, there's this great storm in the Sea of Galilee, and the disciples are in the boat, and they're doing everything they can, and they feel like they're going to die. Okay, and Jesus is with them, but he's asleep, and they wake him up, and Jesus calms the storm. He speaks to the storm and calms the entire situation, the entire reality of their situation. Jesus speaks to it, and the whole thing changes immediately. The whole situation changes. All right, but then the second storm that we see, the disciples don't have Jesus. They're out on the boat by themselves, and they think they're going to die. And they should draw on their previous experience and all this stuff, but they don't. They're just freaking out. And they see Jesus coming to them, walking on the water. And this time he doesn't speak to the waves. He doesn't speak to the wind and the storm. He just walks on top of it. And so to me, that's a picture for us that The first time around, Jesus was around and he fixed the situation. But there's other times around where he's not necessarily around. But when he comes to us, he is walking on the situation. He's transcending the situation. He's ignoring this. That situation that's bothering us so bad is not bothering him. And he does not change the situation. He just empowers us to rise up to his level and to walk on the water, to walk on the waves. Like he asks Peter, like he says, Peter, come on out. And Peter walks on it. Peter transcends the situation. And so there's this ability that Christ creates in us to remain calm, to keep our nose, okay? To be a non-anxious presence in the midst of a storm. So how do we become a non-anxious presence? How do we develop into the kinds of people that keep our nose, that can go into a situation and remain calm and remain steady, and in doing so become sort of these peacemakers or these peace dispensers or these people that bring about peace wherever we go, because God calls us to be a non-anxious presence. I really think that that's true. So I'm just going to give you some stuff that I think you might, from the life of Jesus, that might help you to think about this in a different way and to help you think about your fears, and to dispel some of those fears and some of that hurried productivity that makes us just feel like we've got to do everything so that we can always be ready to handle the chaos that comes our way. How can we be anti-fragile? Okay, so the first thing, and these things are going to sound really silly, but I think you have to look deeper at them, okay? The first thing is to get rid of hurry. But there's a real danger to hurry. Dallas Willard, his famous theologian, says you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. You must ruthlessly eliminate it. Dallas Willard, if you ever listen to him, he was not in a hurry, okay? But more importantly, Jesus, never in a hurry. Have you ever considered how many times Jesus is interrupted? He is interrupted all the time. Okay, now Jesus probably had a clear agenda, okay, and he probably had clear goals and clear directions from God that were set. And he had a small amount, they say like 3 years is all the more he did his ministry. And so he had some things he needed to do in that time, but he was never in a hurry. And he was never anxious about his schedule. And he was interrupted all the time, and he always graciously accepted those interruptions. C.S. Lewis says that how you handle your interruptions is who you actually are. And a lot of times we think that that interruptions are getting in the way of our true stuff. Okay, there's this guy named Gordon Smith, and he wrote a book on vocation called Courage and Calling. And one of the best things I got from that book is he says that he divided up our calling into 3 categories. First, there's the first calling is to follow Christ. That every one of us that are Christians, that's our job, is to follow Jesus, to be a Christ follower, to obey the Bible and to do what it says, and to follow Christ to the best of our ability. That's our calling. That's your calling and mine. It doesn't matter if you're a preacher or anybody. If you are a Christian, you're called to follow Christ and to be like Christ and to be salt and light in the world. So that's calling number 1. Calling number 2 is your vocational calling. Okay, Paul didn't just preach the gospel all the time. He did some other things, and he made some money some other ways. They say he made tents, and he worked. And so, you might be a Christian and your calling is to follow Christ, but you also might be an accountant or a lawyer or a teacher, or whatever, or a mechanic, and that's okay. Like, that's your calling as well. And you need to do that to the best of your ability as if pleasing God and not men, and to work hard at that. Martin Luther says that a Christian shoemaker shouldn't make shoes with crosses on it. He should just make the best kinds of shoes. Okay, and so that's our vocational calling. But then Smith says that there's a third calling, and that is the calling of today. And the calling of today is whatever today brings. All right, and so we have got to be prepared, okay, for whatever today brings. And a lot of times we feel like the calling of today is going to get in the way of our vocational calling, or our calling to be like Christ, but it's really not. But when we shut the door on the calling of today, and when we don't allow for there to be spontaneity or interruption, then we shut God out, because most of the time that's where God is. All right. And so don't forget about the calling of today. And the way that we can do all that, the way that we can really be fully present and to truly pay attention is to not get in a hurry. Okay. Some strong statements here. Okay. You cannot love and be in a hurry. You cannot be like God and be in a hurry. God is love, and love does not hurry. Hurry is incompatible with love. God, there's one person that says that God is the 3-mile-an-hour God. And what does that mean? Well, human beings walk on the average of 3 miles an hour, and God walks with us. So God is a 3-mile-an-hour God. He walks at our pace, and we have to walk at a slow pace. We cannot be in a hurry. If you are in a hurry, then you're never going to be able to love like you should. You're not going to be fully present. You're going to basically undermine and devalue everything that you come across because you're always in a hurry to get somewhere else. And so hurry sounds like it's not a big deal. Oh, just hurry up. We got stuff to do. Hurry up. We've got to keep our schedule. But hurry is a big deal. It's insidious because it ends up ruining our ability to love. And so you have got to, as Dallas Willard says, take his advice, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. My life does not depend on my schedule. It doesn't depend on my productivity. I don't need to listen to the culture tell me all the things that I need to do. And I don't have to go by this schedule of always being in a hurry. That is just, to me, it aborts all of the things that God wants to do in my life. And it does so in this really simple, small way that seems really harmless. So we got to eliminate hurry. Sabbath is the second thing. Now, Sabbath is, there's always a question mark for me about Sabbath. Why does God even make it one of the 10 commandments? Why does he command us to rest? What is so important about Sabbath? Well, Sabbath is rhythm of life that requires us to work and to rest. And Jesus had rhythm. He would retreat and return. And if he had lots of demands on him in public, it seems like the more he would retreat to be by himself and to pray. And he would withdraw to lonely places and pray on his own. And he knew something. He knew that time had to be properly budgeted, okay? And that he had to make room for interruption. And he had to have margin, okay? And so he did that through his Sabbath. He made sure that he was balancing his work and his rest. Sabbath is actually a great means of spiritual warfare. And we don't like to think of it that way. But it's a form of spiritual warfare. The enemy always tempts us to go beyond our limits. He always wants to get us, in fact, to look at the temptations of Christ. When we're tired, when we're worn out, when there's a tendency for us to not be able to focus, that's when Satan comes. And if we are rested and we're grounded in who we are and in God's love, we are going to be able to face those temptations with much greater success because we've spent time, we've allowed our souls to recuperate, we've allowed our spirits to listen to the voices of sanity and to bring us back to the reality of who we are in Christ. And so Sabbath and practicing the Sabbath is so important. I had an epiphany not that long ago, and it was when I was paying attention to Genesis, because it says that God on the last day, God had looked at everything he'd done and he saw it being perfect. And it basically, the words basically show that God looked at creation and there was nothing else he could do. There was no more work that he could add to his creation. It was completely perfect. There was no more work. There was nothing else to do. It was perfect like it was. The work was done. And then it says that he beheld his work, and he rested from it, and he beheld everything. He saw it and looked at it like a Rubik's Cube. He just turned it over on itself over and over again, just basking in his work, and that was considered the Sabbath. And so he was able to fully rest in his work. So in other words, he fully worked when he worked, and then he fully rested when he rested. And the only way he could fully rest when he rested was that he fully worked when he worked. That sounds silly. Another way of saying it. His work was fully complete. And because it was perfect and complete in every way, he'd given himself hard to that work. he could fully rest because there was no work to be done. But let's imagine that he left a couple of the things undone, that he had not completely done all of his work. Well, then when he comes and tries to rest, he can't completely rest because there's still work that needs to be done. Oh yeah, I've still got those weeds to pick. And oh yeah, I've still got those flowers to plant. And oh yeah, I've still got the garden out there to water. I've still got the trash to take out. Well, you can't really rest if there's still work to be done. And so what that shows is a rhythm of, hey, work hard when you work so that you can rest hard when you rest. And what's happened in American society is that we're looking for rest everywhere. And we've made rest our goal, all right? And we want to rest, and we want to find pleasure. We want pleasure. But if you seek pleasure all the time, you're never going to be able to be fully at rest because there's all this work that hasn't been done that's being left undone. And it actually just drives you crazy. And so the path to true rest is true work and to work hard. But then to put a divider on that and to say 6 days we're going to work hard, but then we're going to have Sabbath and we're going to rest on that day. And so are you instituting a Sabbath in your life? Third, now this is going to sound weird and it's going to sound like it doesn't add up to what we're talking about, but koinonia. There's this idea, this is a Greek word, koinonia. It means spiritual friendship or authentic community or church community. Hyper individualism is what's ruining our us and our society, and we're losing relationally and emotionally, right? Well, what are the ways that we can recuperate emotionally and relationally? It's being around people that are our people. We need people to share with. We need to know and to be known. We have this deep need to connect with our brothers and sisters who are like-minded. And that's being tossed aside. That's being called unimportant. And our church gatherings and stuff are being stifled right now. And that's causing huge gaping holes in our hearts and souls. Have you ever thought about why we spend so much time on our phones and why we spend so much time on social media? Is it not to connect? Is it not because we have a desire to connect? And yet those things promise us connectivity and connection, but they don't deliver. In fact, what I have understood the more I've dealt with Facebook is Facebook and Instagram stuff leaves me feeling less connected. Okay, it reminds me of what I want and what I don't necessarily have. It shows me that I'm missing out on what's happening in the world and what's going on and all my friends that are doing things. And I'm left feeling alone and feeling like everybody else is connected and doing things. And the truth is that they're not any more connected and doing things that I am, but it's this mirage, this false front that we're putting up on those pages, showing ourselves to be having all this fun and being connected and being filled with activity. And, you know, we're starting to figure it out now that a lot of people aren't who they say they are. And they don't really look that way in real life. And that trip to Rome happened 5 years ago, you know, that kind of thing. But it's perpetuating this pain of isolation, unbeknownst to us. And so it's kind of, they say it's the pornography of community. And it wastes time that could otherwise be spent in real fellowship and real relationship. And so who are your people? And where are your people? Call up your people. Meet up with your people. Find your people. Who are your people? There have been a lot of times in my life where I felt like I didn't have people. And this is one of the most miraculous things that I've seen from God in my life. But I remember asking God for new friends in high school. I needed my people. I needed people that were good for me, and God gave them to me. I remember being alone and feeling like I needed people in college and saying, God, I need my people. I need some people that can be my people, that love me for who I am and accept me for the way that I am. And God gave me those people. And if you don't have a people that's your people, ask God for some people that can be your people, because he'll give you your people. And you need those people. You need the connection that comes from being with those people. That's the authentic community. That's the church community. That is the koinonia, or the spiritual friendship that is so important for us. And so do you have that? And are you exercising that? And if you're not, you've got to fight to get that back, because we're not meant to make it alone. We're not supposed to go alone. There's an old Kenyan proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we're trying to go far and persevere and make it in this life. And so we have to go together. We cannot do it alone. Now, I think that another thing that Jesus did is when he was off by himself, he was in prayer with God. And prayer is not just, we just think of prayer as asking God for things, but it's so much more than that. There's this idea of the Catholic prayer, contemplative prayer, which is sort of just being with God and just basking in spiritual things. Prayer is to obey God. Prayer is to listen to God. Prayer is to knock on the door of God's heart. In fact, prayer is just basically to respond to God because God is knocking on the door of our hearts. What does it say in Revelation? It says, behold, I stand on the door and knock. If anyone hears me and opens the door, I'll come into them and I will dine with them and them with me. And so God knocks on our hearts. He's saying, hey, I'm here. And when we pray and when we're basically opening the spiritual channels to God, we're opening our souls and our hearts and spirits to God for the fellowship that only God can give. And what happens is that rest and renewal and strength and knowing what to do, all those things are sort of being spiritually downloaded into our souls. Okay, I remember they asked Mother Teresa, they said, what do you do and how do you do your work so well and how are you able to do all this? And she said, well, it's simple. We just pray all the time. You work all the time and you take time out to pray, but we pray all the time and take out time out to work. And they said, well, when you pray, what do you say to God? And she said, well, I don't say anything to God. I just listen. And they said, well, what does God say? And she said, well, he doesn't say anything. He just listens. And that might sound like a load of foolishness to you, but there's just this mystery of prayer where we're listening to the heart of God and where God is somehow listening to the heart of man. And there's this beautiful, mysterious interchange that happens. And the more that you do it, the more that you'll find this miracle of prayer that is feeding our life and feeding us, giving us energy and grounding us in God's hope and love. And so there's this contemplative prayer practice that we need to be thinking about, that was such a part of Jesus' life. And finally, there's this sort of holy indifference that comes about in our lives. And indifference sounds kind of like you don't care. It sounds apathetic, but it's not. It's more like an indifference of freedom. And you know these people that come along, and it's this presence, this anxiety presence, it's this freedom of this detachment, this yielding. And it's this simple idea, this simple mindset that kind of comes on people where we don't need to control. We don't have to control. We don't have to manipulate people and events and circumstances of our lives. We don't have to work so hard for the desired ends. We don't even have to worry so much about what those desired ends are, because there's some miracle that's happened. And what's happened? It's that we suddenly know that Jesus is with us, and we suddenly live in God's presence at all times. Go read Brother Lawrence. Okay, go read some of the old great people. They had come to be at home with themselves. Brother Lawrence is a good example. He never wrote many books or anything, but his book is one of the most. His book of just letters and as a compilation is one of the most important books, spiritual books that there are. It's considered a spiritual practice, spiritual great or whatever. It's one of the greatest spiritual books written, and it's called Practicing the Presence of God. And what does he have? It's a non-anxious presence. Okay, he's practicing the presence of God. So he was just a guy that washed dishes downstairs, and you could look at that and say, this is not productive. I could be doing more with my spiritual life. You could look at that and say, this isn't important. But he saw it as very important, and he learned to consider it the most important thing. And all he did was practice the presence of God, and he allowed God to come into his circumstances and to color all of his circumstances in a different kind of way. And so that's what I mean by this sort of holy indifference, this holy detachment, or this freedom that we don't have to control, we don't have to manipulate. It's this thing of where Jesus comes in, and instead of calming the storm and changing all the circumstances around it, He just invites us with him to come to him. And when we're with him, we transcend the storm. We rise above it, okay? We don't have to have control, and we don't have to manipulate, and we don't have to worry about prioritizing all these things. And we can welcome interruption into our life, and we have the bandwidth to roll with the punches and to be anti-fragile, okay? And it is what it means to walk with God. It is the goal. And that is the non-anxious presence that the world so desperately needs. And so I just encourage you to foster a non-anxious presence, to ask God and to work towards not being anxious, not being in a hurry, not being so fearful and worried that we're trying to control and to do everything and manipulate everything. We can't do it. That is the road to becoming crazy. And it's the road that the world is on. But we've got different resources, and we're marching to a different drum. In fact, we pledge allegiance to a different king. And our prayer is not our will, God, but your will be done. And let your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And what do? We just work to allow God's kingdom to be here in me, and make space in our own hearts and souls for God's kingdom to come and his will to be done in our life. And when God's kingdom has come and God is present with us, and we know that Christ is with us, all of his power and all of his resource and all of his peace and all of his mercy and all of his goodness and grace, all of those things are present with us when Christ is present with us. And so all we have to do is keep tethered to Christ. And what does he tell us? He says, look, I'm the vine and you're the branches. I used to do this all the time. I say the vine and the branches, and all we have to do is remain. He says, if any person remains in me and I remain in them, they're going to bear much fruit. All right, you're going to bear fruit, which is the whole point. And like, you're not even going to have to work to do that. You're going to bear much fruit automatically. But then he says, but apart from me, you can do nothing. Go look it up, John 15:5, one of the greatest verses in the New Testament. I'm the vine, you're the branches. If anyone remains in me and I remain in him, he'll bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. So what's our job? It is to protect at all costs this relationship with Christ and to remain with him all the time. And these are the ways, some of the ways that we can start to do that. So I hope that you'll hear that. I hope that maybe some of these things you'll grab a hold of. I always say, eat the chicken, spit out the bones. That's all I have to say today. I hope that wherever you are, that you're well. I hope that you are not fearful. I hope that you won't keep on this treadmill of and this reactivity and this need for so much productivity, that you can step outside of that and just know that you're fully loved by God and that you don't have to live this way, that we don't have to let all of these fears and all of these things bombard us, that we can live free lives in Christ right now today if we'll simply hold on to Christ and work towards being a non-anxious presence. That's all I have. Thanks, friends. Much love and respect, and we'll see you soon.